When it comes to fighting games, a lot of different factors influence which one you pick up. Are there mechanics that seem interesting? Does the game feel good to play? Is the art style appealing? A lot of things can influence what you decide to pass over in favor of Beyblade Metal Masters on the DS, but principal among all of these is the roster. There are plenty of fighting games that are no doubt top of the line, with mechanics I would really enjoy. But if the roster doesn't reach out and grab you immediately, if you don't find that one character you want to learn based purely on how they look, it's gonna get passed over. For more casual players, the choice of what character to play doesn't usually come down to who's the best on a tier list or who has the best tools. It's all about who looks like they'd be the most fun to play, if they have cool moves, or if their personality is fun. Did you pick Nagoriyuki in Guilty Gear Strive because his 5k was only -2 on block, or did you pick him because he's a goddamn vampire samurai? Fighting game characters are just as much about playability as they are about character, the type of character that lets them stick around for fight after fight. But for every Ryu, Terry, and Scorpion, you have the other ones. Characters who manage to join the roster of the best, only to get swept under the rug after a single outing. The fighting game one-and-dones are a very special class. Fighting games love to bring back old characters. It's a chance to bring back a classic playstyle or a beloved character, or even take it in a whole new direction in either of those regards. To get left behind completely means something had to have gone wrong, and today I really want to look and see what happened to these guys that were all but abandoned, and see how the series they come from have treated them in their absence. Now, as for the confines we're working in today, we're not going to be looking at boss characters. These are usually designed as one-offs anyway, and if SNK had to keep bringing back Rugal in every entry, Mexico would declare war on Japan. Secondly, no guest characters. Sorry, but if you thought that Spartan Nicole was here to stay in Dead or Alive, you're a better dreamer than I am. We're also gonna be nicer to the newer characters. I mean, if Marissa and Manon are so popular, how come they're only in one game? Some just haven't had the chance to make another appearance yet. Collector, Lucia, Mian, these aren't unpopular characters, there's just only so many roster slots to pass around. Now, there is an exception, and that's if a character was so unpopular in their debut outing that it's pretty obvious that they're not coming back. This is gonna matter a lot with King of Fighters. Finally, and this one might be a bit more contentious, but dream matches will not be counted for appearances. What I mean is that games where the whole gimmick is, we brought everybody back, as an excuse to reuse assets is not enough to escape discussion. I am dubbing this the Mortal Kombat Armageddon rule because Hsu Hao cannot escape what's coming for him. Street Fighter is our first stop. It gave us Makoto, we owe it that much. Now, Street Fighter 2 is responsible for every game we're talking about today, and every fighting game period. I have no doubt that without Street Fighter 2, fighting games would look completely different. In fact, Street Fighter 2 is such a ubiquitous name in terms of video games, you might not even catch yourself saying the two. The first Street Fighter is a butcher's attempt at a wedding cake. It looks a bit like a fighting game, but got almost everything else wrong. Now, in all fairness, they had nobody to show them how to do it right, but that doesn't really change how the game came out. It's stiff and controls like garbage. The graphics are unimpressive and bland, and you have to wrestle super moves out of the game with no assurity that they're going to come out. This, coming after this, is almost believable. But only if this is a Street Fighter V. A huge cast selectable all at the start wasn't really how fighting games worked yet. You had Ryu, looking the way he would for the next 30 years until Capcom decided he had earned a beard, Ken, who is Ryu but red, and the rest. None were selectable, and even less were interesting. Now, a few characters did escape the vortex that was Street Fighter 1, and those that did so for the better. Obviously, the big winner in this regard is Sagat. The one-eyed Muay Thai champion is one of the most beloved characters in the whole franchise, a massive crowd pleaser and DLC pusher, and would go on to become one of Ryu's longest-standing rivals. But he's not the only one who crawled out of the tar pits. Adon would Jaguar Revolver his way through the Alpha series and into Street Fighter IV. Gen would follow a similar path and introduce stance-based fighting into the series. Birdie would, after a quick dose of the almighty melanin, come back in Alpha and even found a way onto Street Fighter V's base roster. Hey everybody, I made it onto the Street Fighter V base roster! Why do you sound excited about that? Heck, even Eagle managed to get into Capcom vs SNK after the old Alpha Spit and Shine, but notably, all of these characters are from the latter half of the arcade ladder. Starting out, your run pits you against Retsu, Geki, Joe, Mike, and Lee. Yeah, the original Street Fighter wasn't exactly reaching for the stars with Brazilian monster men and Russian pro wrestlers. Their idea of exotic was a black guy. These characters are as basic as they get. Nothing really inspiring on the gameplay or design front. They weren't meant to be much more than beat-em-up grunts with a bit more health, but even then, 2 fights back-to-back with guys in jeans? There isn't anything worth bringing back with these guys, and short of a complete reworking, there's nothing to really do with them. And a total rework would make them feel like a brand new character, so why not just make a brand new character? Lee fans will be fine if their spot is taken up by Aki. They've been through worse. None of these 5 ever appeared in a playable capacity after this point. Geki even got downgraded in the comics from an individual to a blanket name used for a whole ninja clan. That is worth noting though. Street Fighter has done a fairly good job making sure no character ever goes unrepresented for very long. Sure, not everybody can be playable, but characters like Mike, Joe, and Lee, who otherwise would have been relegated to the dustbin of history, have these neat little entries on the Shadaloo CRI website that show they weren't forgotten. Heck, even a Geki clan member managed to sneak into Vega's arcade mode ending in Street Fighter V. Not to mention, all 5 of them have made appearances in the Udon Street Fighter comic series, which isn't something everyone can say. Because Remy hasn't gotten in yet. Hands down, though, the biggest winner of the lot is Retsu. He managed to make it into Street Fighter VI's World Tour mode as a fightable opponent. And while he may just use Ryu's style, the fact that enough attention was paid to such an obscure character from such an unloved section of the series is commendable on Capcom's part. Next comes Street Fighter II, and the World Warriors have gotten exceptionally fine treatment, showing up in pretty much every game no matter how E-Honda they are. I say almost, though, because after Street Fighter II, Capcom and the Street Fighter team were interested not so much in continuing the legacy of 2, but carving a whole new path. How could they have known it would have led into a brick wall? The mission statement behind Street Fighter III was to make something new without relying on what had worked before. The roster? All gone, save for the most popular ones, Ken and Ryu. In their place would be a whole new cast of characters that, while some may resemble the older fighters, would be completely new and shake up everything people thought Street Fighter was. For instance, a lot of people thought that Street Fighter was popular and made money. The idea to shake up the roster this drastically was a very bold choice, but it was one that initially did not pay off in the slightest. No Chun-Li, no Guile, no Zangief, no Dalsim, no Blanca. The characters that had started the fighting game boom were gone. And unlike the Alpha series, it was hard for players to tell which characters got which functions. Charlie having a Guile's moves, pretty easy to tell. Even in storyline, he's Guile's best friend, and if you don't share how to do a flash kick with your buddies, don't be surprised when you're not invited to the barbecue. But finding which character played like Guile out of this lineup? This one. In their place were characters that weren't bad per se, and certainly filled the functions that the old characters did, but it's just not what people wanted. In the time since the game's release, though, and with the tournament scene heating up in a huge way, the game and its characters started to get looked back on a lot more fondly. Now characters like Makoto, Ibuki, and Dudley were considered fan favorites, and when the time came to add new characters to Super Street Fighter IV, these were the picks that managed to make the leap, alongside Yang and Yun in the arcade edition, and Elena and Hugo in Ultra. Add on Alex, Oro, 12, Urien, and Gil in Street Fighter V, and it may have been a rocky start, but they managed to recover the roster nicely. That does leave 4 characters in the dust. These 4 characters are the only ones who have yet to make an appearance in a Street Fighter game after the dust had settled, and each one carries a fairly interesting story as to why it ended up that way. Let's start with the man in the wrong game, Remy. Introduced in Third Strike, Remy was a unique character among the cast, being a charge character in the same vein as Charlie and Guile. Charge characters largely forsake the quarter circle forward in favor of holding back and then quickly snapping forward to perform their special moves, which in Remy's case are the standard Sonic Boom and Flash Kick that his charge contemporaries have. Now, most people see what Remy brings to the table and only see that, his Flash Kick and Sonic Boom, and brand him just a lamer Guile. That's not really fair though, as he does have moves that neither Guile nor Charlie have, like his Cold Blue Kick, which allows him to stay mobile, and he's overall more offensively focused than the other charge characters. There are still reasons, though, that when tier lists are put together, Remy usually hangs out near the bottom. His damage is only okay. He has the worst super art in the game in Blue Nocturne, his normals overall aren't great, and then there's the reason I say he's in the wrong game. If you know Street Fighter 3, you know how important parrying is. The most famous fighting game clip ever shows off just how vital parrying is to the game of Street Fighter 3. If you're gonna play this game, you need to know how to do it. Parrying in Street Fighter 3 is done by tapping forward just as an attack would hit you to snuff it out. Fans of Directions may have just noticed a huge problem this presents for Remy. Remy as a charge character is at odds with the most important mechanic for high-level Street Fighter 3, losing the charge that he needs for every one of his specials, except for the Cold Blue Kick, every time he parries. Now, there is a technique called charge partitioning, where you're able to store up the charge for a charged move for a few extra frames after pressing forward, but if you're gonna learn how to charge partition, just play Urien. Those parries as well meant that suddenly every character had pretty universal options to deal with fireballs like Remy's. When learning how to parry, everybody tells you to practice on fireballs, since they're a safe starting point with not much follow-up. In Street Fighter 2, Guile was able to menace the entire roster with Sonic Booms, which necessitated unsafe movement to escape from, or a block that kept them from approaching. While parrying through Remy's fireballs didn't even lose you positioning, since all you had to do was parry. You either had to pick between charging your move and presenting any sort of threat, or parrying and staying alive. Parrying is both the easiest way to deal with Remy and the hardest thing for Remy to do. Of course, this is all without the third option, which is to pick Makoto and win games. Now, like I said, gameplay isn't everything, and Dan exists, so being a top tier isn't all that goes into being a popular character. For Remy, though, it's not just gameplay where he's deficient. Remy's addition in Street Fighter 3 put him in an odd spot, as he's neither an important character to the game's Illuminati plotline like Urien, Necro, or 12, or a bombastic enough personality to stand out like Dudley, Hugo, or Ibuki. He's quiet, moody, and lacks the love for fighting that most characters have. In fact, he hates fighting, and wants to take revenge on the fighters of the world by fighting them. Remy's hatred for fighters, while being a fighter himself, is a pretty heavily mocked aspect of his character. One that kind of obscures how his arcade mode ending is him returning to his dead sister who's trapped in ice, dropping her in the ocean, and then leaving. Without a captivating personality or a gameplay style that impressed, Remy is largely considered the most forgettable character in 3's whole roster. And without the groundswell of support other characters got, his chances of returning have only dwindled with time. There's honestly more support to get him in just because he's been omitted than there is for him from genuine fans. He's not hated or anything, he's no Rufus, but just like Remy himself, it's mostly ambivalence. One character with way more fan support, and probably the strangest Street Fighter of all time, though, is Necro. Immediately a departure from Remy's bad boy design, which feels more at home as a redesigned Iori Yagami than as a Street Fighter character, Necro is the exact brand of Capcom weird that gave us Dhalsim and Blanka. Speaking of those two, they're actually the sources of inspiration for Necro, taking Dhalsim's stretchy limbs and dive kick, as well as Blanka's electrical powers. Unlike those two, I can shake the hand of a Necro player without reaching for the disinfectant. Where Remy failed to set himself apart from his inspirations, Necro is a beautifully unique freak that couldn't be mistaken as either of his predecessors. Instead of keeping the opponent at range with long normals and projectiles, Necro is looking to pressure the opponent into the corner where a biblical beatdown will then commence. Then there's the obvious part of Necro, his design and animations. Necro oozes charisma and charm with every move. Watching him contort and swing as he tries to knock you out, pose confidently as he covers himself in electricity, and his almost hypnotically smooth idle stance makes him the type that stands out no matter what. That's all ignoring that he is a tall, bald Russian man with toothpaste white skin, purple suspenders, and a red tattoo who loves opera, trash talk, and a goth girlfriend who wields a chainsaw. Necro is dripping with style, and with a gameplay style to match, he became a fan favorite, if not the most competitive character in the game. So he's a fun and unique character with a lot of fan support. Why hasn't he made it back into a game yet? Well, Necro is a case of right place, wrong time. See, after Street Fighter 3 came out and Capcom moved away from fighting games, it took a long time for Street Fighter to come back. And when it did, it was with Street Fighter 4, which was treated as a return to basics. All the characters you remember exactly as you remember them, which includes Dhalsim and Blanka. This is just speculation on my part, but I think feature creep kept Necro out of the lineup. Cause you have the stretchy guy, you have the electric guy, so what's the use for a stretchy electric guy? That's not to say similar movesets can't exist. The second most popular character is the first most popular character in red, and the third is him in black, and the fourth is him in a dress. But in a game that was looking to bring back casual and nostalgic Street Fighter fans, I can understand Necro being low on the list of fighters to return. It's the same explanation they gave for Oro, he's just too weird. Then 5 introduced Lara to fill the electric slot, and even later brought back Blanka, with Dhalsim still kicking around, and Necro found himself shafted again. Now, I do like his chances. Of the 4 characters left in Street Fighter 3, I get the feeling that Necro is due up next. But it's a case of, I love him, but I get why he's not here. If nothing else, we need to get Snowland back in a game already. Now for the third Street Fighter castaway, it's by far the saddest story. Sean Matsuda. Now, Ryu has always had Sakura as a secondary character to act as a mini-him, but Sakura made sure to differentiate herself to become a fan favorite separate from her connection to Ryu. With a character like that, the question came up of who Ken's Sakura would be, and from that came Sean. A basketball-loving street fighter who idolized Ken Masters, and refused to give up until he became his protege. Ken wasn't really looking to become a teacher since probably not very good at it, but after losing contact with Ryu, he decided that training Sean might be enough to pull his friend out of hiding. Now, when Sean first came out in Street Fighter 3, he was a demon, an extremely strong character who was fast, built meter like crazy, spent it constantly, and was pretty much impossible to keep up with. Seeing how he plays in the first iteration of Street Fighter 3 and in Giant Attack, the second revision, versus how he plays in Third Strike, is the difference between morning, noon, and night, because he got better in Second Impact, and then Third Strike happened. Nerfs in fighting games can be said to kill a character. And that's usually exaggeration. The character is fine post-nerf, and just has to work harder to get what they used to get for free. Sean is not one such case. Sean in Third Strike is in the running for maybe the worst nerfing a character has ever received in a fighting game. Being a Shoto means he shares moves with Ken, and Ryu, and Terry, and Kazuya. Fucking Smash players. But every move he has is just a worse version of what Ken and Ryu get. His reach isn't as good, his attacks don't deal as much damage, and they're not as safe, which means that on hit, Sean can be punished. Fighting in a fighting game is considered a suboptimal play. The supers he could abuse in Giant Attack were nerfed into the dirt until he had absolutely no tools left. He was quite literally just a worse version of Ken and plummeted to the bottom of tier lists, only with a 12-sized crash pad to keep him from hitting rock bottom. Why did this happen, and whose cornflakes did Sean piss in to make it that way? Well, the reason for Sean's nerfing is actually one that we know, and the reason is crazy insulting to pretty much anyone involved. The developers of Third Strike could tell they were making a very technically complex game, one that the good players were great at, and the bad players were horrible at. So they decided to include a mechanically weak character that good players could pick up when playing with bad players. That would give them a chance to beat them and feel good. For some reason, Sean was picked, and from there he was broken to the point of no return. This philosophy is flawed, though, as no fighting game player possesses basic human empathy. Sean's popularity and play rate plummeted in Third Strike, relegated to near joke character status as he struggled hard against his fellow low tiers in 12 and Remy, and against someone like Chun-Li or Yun or Master Ken, not a chance. Now, Sean still has his fan base. The players from the Second Impact days have been crying out for Sean's re-inclusion, and to bring him back to his former glory, but it seems less and less likely the more time passes. Laura, on top of gatekeeping Necro out of Street Fighter V, seems to have done the same thing to Sean, as in the story, she's his older sister, so there wasn't much of a reason to include both the Matsuda siblings in a single game. With Street Fighter VI, though, Sean's chances are looking up, especially with Ken's current plotline being the perfect place for his plucky former student to step in and give him a hand. So Sean fans at least have that to cling on to. As for the final fighter, I don't even think his fans know what to expect. Q, the trenchcoat-wearing pseudo-cyborg introduced at the very end of 3's life cycle in Third Strike. Q is an enigma in every way possible. Backstory? Q's backstory is nestled between P and S. We know pretty much nothing about him aside from that he's wanted by the government, and he started as a background character on Ken's stage in Street Fighter II. That ambiguity led to tons of theories as to his origins, from being Chun-Li's father in an iron mask, to being an android that escaped from the Illuminati, a serial killer, a detective, a ghost. You can draw any conclusion you want from him, since Capcom gave us so much wiggle room on his origins. He has a very strange theme that feels totally different from the rest of the cast, while still being absolutely fantastic. He's the only character without a stage specific to him, he's the only character who shows his muscular system instead of his skeleton when he's shocked, all of his bio-info is unknown. Q is a captivating character based purely on how little Capcom gave us to work with. His erratic tendencies extend to his gameplay as well, as Q has one of the most bizarre playstyles out of the whole roster. He doesn't have a fighting style or even much of a plan when it comes to fighting, just swinging his arms with the force of a truck and the grace to match. He's kind of a rushdown, kind of a grappler, all wrapped up in a gimmick where taunting gives him a defensive buff. Q is a bad character in Third Strike, but he's not uninteresting. The community around Q and labbing him out, figuring out how he works and how to execute his potential properly, is a fervent one. Q fans are among the most dedicated fans for any character in Street Fighter. So then what are his chances for getting into another game? He already did? As if Q's entire existence couldn't get stranger, in walks the similarly monosyllabic G. Introduced in Street Fighter V, G is the self-appointed president of the world, who spends his days campaigning on the streets in a top hat and sleeveless suit jacket that shows off his shifting gold tattoos that make up a map of the Earth. G is fast approaching Necro levels of complete insanity, but what does any of this have to do with Q? Well, aside from having a similar fascination with the alphabet, the end of G's reveal trailer revealed his story mode costume, and it was Q! The hat, the jacket, and especially the mask were all obvious Q references, but everything was just a little off. The mask was a hockey mask and not a full iron one. The coat isn't as long, and the default colors aren't Q's colors, but an alt color does give him Q's colors, and the official website even references it. Then there are all the moves that G and Q share, G's complete irrelevancy to 5's story. This only leaves you with even more questions. Are they the same? Does Q take off his mask and hit the campaign trail? Did something happen to G to make him into Q? Is this all just Capcom designing a second, weirder character and deciding to connect them just to screw with people? There's no way of knowing, so as far as Q's chances of getting into another game, heck, he might already be in 6 and nobody's found him yet. For Mortal Kombat's one and dones, we're not going to be so much looking at the beginning of the franchise or where it is now, but those awkward teenage years. God, it is so embarrassing when you start growing polygons in places there weren't before. The PlayStation 2 era was a complicated time for Mortal Kombat, embracing the 3D style that was introduced in Mortal Kombat 4 and staying that way for 4 more games. This era is very divisive. Either you love the 3D Mortal Kombat games, or you hate them. It's hard to find anybody who has any middle ground. That same push and pull applies to their rosters, because there are some dead-on hits, and some full-on misses. If nothing else, this era of Mortal Kombat gave us Kenshi. And Kenshi's the man. He is so popular that when the universe was restarted and roles were reassigned in Mortal Kombat 1, he was upgraded to main character status, on top of having the coolest moves and fatalities in the game. He's not the only winner though. I really like Frost, but especially when she gets cyberized. Havik is a character that I always wanted to see come back, and thanks to his inclusion in MK1, we got him back in all of his gory glory. But when the 3D era misses, it hits windshields in the parking lot. Dairo is a great template for what you can expect from a bad 3D Mortal Kombat character. Does he have an interesting history? Kinda. He was a guard in the Order realm whose family got killed by an assassin. And after getting his revenge, his own guard buddies captured him and sentenced him to life in prison. He gets out in a jailbreak and becomes a mercenary, since now he's a fugitive in his own home dimension. That's a good backstory, plenty of intrigue there. Will he ever get back to the Order realm? Will he find out who sent the assassin that killed his family? Is he gonna get revenge on his guard buddies who sent him to prison? All of these plot threads completely disregarded. He explains his entire backstory in a single cutscene during the game's conquest mode, and as soon as he's done, he leaves the story forever. Has anybody ever told you anything more interesting after they say their entire family was murdered? Mechanically and design-wise, there's nothing about him that really gets across either his old guard status or his new mercenary status. He is the most bog-standard character possible, just fancy armor and a bad haircut. He'd be more at home as a fodder character you fight in the story mode, but he managed to sneak his way onto the base roster and leave a 0 impact. Well, not 0. Clearly somebody on the Mortal Kombat team liked him, but thought he would be cooler if his torso was backwards. For as good as Street Fighter is at keeping characters in your mind, Mortal Kombat is that much better. It is extremely good about keeping characters around without keeping them on the roster. It's really hard to finish an arcade mode ending without getting a callback to an obscure character. And Dairo even managed to get better than that. In Mortal Kombat 1, like I said, a bunch of characters have their backstories rewritten, remixed, and refreshed to give them a new lease on life. And for the reintroduction of Havik, why not take the character from the Chaos realm and put them in the Order realm? That's right, by getting his face burned off and fully succumbing to madness, Dairo becomes Havik. They took one of the most forgettable characters from the 3D era and rolled him into one of the most memorable, and it worked great. I mean, it is a lot more Havik than it is Dairo, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. Now, when you think Mortal Kombat, and think I have not interacted with Mortal Kombat in any meaningful capacity since 1995, what do you think? There are too many colored ninjas! Mortal Kombat's Rainbow of Ninjas is easily the most memorable part of its early roster. If you have a favorite color, it can vivisect people. The trend stopped being noticeable and became unavoidable in Mortal Kombat Trilogy, with 7 roster slots taken up by ninjas, and an additional 6 being taken up by the female ninjas and cyber ninjas. With so many of them, the devs decided it would be fun to make an amalgam character that used all their moves. And from there, Chameleon was born. After work had finished on Chameleon, the team had started to notice that their hearts were beating really funny and fast, and that blood was gushing from their eyes, and they were attempting to swallow their own tongues. It was only after a clever intern pointed out that they had spelled Chameleon with a C and not a K that they got to work reusing the female ninja assets to make Chameleon. The pair were translucent versions of the basic ninja models, and would quickly flash between each of the different colors, and have access to all their moves depending on the color they were at the moment. Now, the pair were clearly meant to be a little joke towards the fact they had so many color-coded ninjas, but there was still an attempt to work them into the lore. Chameleon was said to be a Zaterran, the same race as Reptile, who had managed to escape the slaughter of their realm by turning invisible, and now wanted revenge on Shao Kahn for what he had done. Meanwhile, inferior Chameleon was just a guy who watched from the shadows, waiting for his time to strike. Yeah, it's time for the big reveal. This is not about Chameleon. It's only about male Chameleon. See, Chameleon actually makes an appearance in Mortal Kombat 1 as a cameo character, a position that's currently keeping Shujinko, Movado, Tremor, Darius, and somehow only Farah from suffering a similar fate. There was clearly attention given to Chameleon both then and now to make her feel at least a little bit more like the sort of character that could fit in with the rest of the cast. But Chameleon? Nah, he's just a guy. He switches colors. He turns invisible. You already have a ninja that can turn invisible. Why do you need a guy who can do it but worse? Even in Armageddon, a game that is not gonna help his chances of getting out of this, that game still leaves his arcade mode ending super unfulfilling, saying the whole story was he was waiting for his chance to make his mark, and now he has! Telltale of the mighty Chameleon, who valiantly snuck past all opposition, then promptly faded into the wallpaper. If you want somebody who's gonna stick out no matter what, that's Drahmin. Kind of the inverse of Dairo here, Drahmin can't help but stand out in a lineup thanks to his skinless body, club hand, and colorful mask. As for a backstory to match that gruesome design, the team didn't seem to be sure of what somebody would have to do to deserve a fate like this. They eventually came to the conclusion he was either such a ruthless warlord who slaughtered hundreds of people that he had his bones ripped apart by demons, or he was a landlord. He got off easy. From there, alongside Moloch, saved from this discussion purely based on his sub-boss status, became top hell torture bros and eventually started working for Quan Chi. After their new boss abandons them, the pair set out to get revenge. On the moveset side too, he's not half bad, able to slam the ground with his club hand, swing it around like a propeller, and even gather up a ball of flies to fling at the opponent. Of all of the characters from the 3D era, Drahmin is one that a lot of people are surprised hasn't returned in some form. But it gets a lot less surprising when you read the interview with Ed Boon, where alongside Hsu Hao, he was his least favorite character introduced in the era. This goes along with his bio card, where Ed Boon discusses how difficult a character Drahmin was to develop. And I can't imagine it's a well he's eager to go back to. Luckily, we do get to see how he's holding up since we last saw him. I never said you wanted to see it. However, we are ignoring a large sect of the worst 3D Mortal Kombat has to offer. All four of these characters have two things in common. They are as bland as they come, and Kano! Yay! Everybody loves Kano! Well, he had proven to be a fan favorite, and his status as a member of the Black Dragon Gang left him with a lot of possibilities for secondary characters. The first time they tried this, absolute and utter success. Cabal instantly fit in with the rest of the roster. Became a fan favorite, extremely dominant in competitive play, couldn't have asked for a better follow-up to Kano. But we could have asked for a worse one. That was Jarek in Mortal Kombat 4. Jarek is not a noteworthy character in any regard. His moveset is just Kano's, but in 3D. His fatalities are just Kano's, but he's in 3D. And the only reason he exists is because he's Kano, but in 3D. The only reason that Jarek exists is because they killed off Kano at the end of the last game and needed a replacement. The only thing of any note from Jarek is his ending in Mortal Kombat 4, which, aside from being a three-parter between Sonya, himself, and Jax, is also hilarious.
Jax! I thought you were going to...
Thought I was what? Dead? Like my partner you just tossed off the cliff?
I'm sorry, Jax. Please, don't drop me. Wait, I promise.
Too late, Jarek.
You can't drop me. You have to uphold the law. You have to arrest me. Wait, this is brutality. You can't do it.
Wrong, Jarek. This is not a brutality. This is a fatality.
After Jarek's unceremonious arrival and exit from the series, the cast of Black Dragon alumni would grow in Mortal Kombat Deception, with the firecrackers of Charisma, Kira, and Cobra. There is no joke. The most interesting fact between the two of them is that in beta builds of Mortal Kombat Deception, Cobra was called Ken, because they'd just designed Ken Masters again as a shaggy-haired blonde guy who practiced martial arts. He was designed as a simple pick-up-and-play character for new players, which makes sense then why you'd theme him after a familiar character like Ken, but all of this without any spice that would actually make somebody want to play him. As he is now, Cobra's motivation extends to, I want to kill people! That's not a motivation, that's a requirement for entry. Kira, meanwhile, has something? She's meant to be the Black Dragon equivalent to Sonya, so she shares a lot of moves between Kano and Sonya, like her kiss, but these two don't even amount to a tenth of a Jarek. At least he died funny. The pair at least got to make a cameo, with a C, appearance in Mortal Kombat Legends Snowblind, as the Black Dragon are the villains of the movie. They get drastic redesigns, and those unfamiliar with the 3D games would probably assume they were movie original characters. But if you need a show of how Mortal Kombat will never ever let a character go, these two losers got to appear in 2022! But with the Black Dragons came a second criminal organization meant to counter them, the Red Dragons. Led by Mavado, these were a gang looking to take out the Black Dragons, and Mavado sent his #1 guy to get the job done. Hsu Hao is by far the most infamous of the 3D era characters. When discussing their favorite and least favorite characters from the era, people set aside Hsu Hao, almost like a silent agreement that, yeah, we hate this guy, goes without saying. It's like saying you can't pick a starter as your favorite Pokemon. It's too obvious, so don't even consider it. Hsu Hao was introduced in Deadly Alliance, and landed with a resounding thud. Instantly, people just didn't like Hsu Hao. It could have been for a lot of different reasons, like how he's another character meant to replace Kano without half the charisma Kano was able to show off. His moves were pretty boring and lacked any impact, his backstory was nothing. He really doesn't have a character aside from his mustache. All of this made him a really unpopular character. But that doesn't really sound like the makings of the least popular Mortal Kombat character ever. I mean, he's just another one for the pile, but Hsu Hao seems to get so many more stones thrown his way than the likes of Cobra and Kira, despite being just as bland and forgettable. In fact, it's so many that he's been stoned to death. Anytime Hsu Hao appears or is mentioned, it is purely so the developers can make fun of how bad he is. In Jax's arcade mode ending in Deadly Alliance, Hsu Hao is vaporized and canonically killed. In his Armageddon ending, Hsu Hao is double vaporized and even more canonically killed. In Aaron Black's Mortal Kombat 11 intro, he's decapitated, and if it was any more canon, he'd be shot out of one. Then there are smaller ones, like characters using Hsu Hao's name as an insult in intro dialogue, him being one of only 2 characters, along with Chameleon with a C, to ever be vocally deconfirmed for both Mortal Kombat 9 and Mortal Kombat X. What the heck is going on with Hsu Hao? Who hates him so much that he ends up getting treated like this? In short, everyone! Hsu Hao was internally a very unpopular character at Midway/Netherrealms. Longtime writer for the series John Vogel spoke in Hsu Hao's bio card about how he was disappointed that Hsu Hao ever had to come back, intending for his death in Deadly Alliance to be final.
But Mortal Kombat Armageddon is about bringing every character back to life, so Hsu Hao is back, much to my dismay.
Jarek was allowed in Armageddon. Cobra was allowed in Armageddon. Kira was allowed in Armageddon, Drahmin was allowed in Armageddon, Moloch was allowed in Armageddon, both Chameleons were allowed in Armageddon! Hsu Hao, I don't really think we need him. Hsu Hao was the other character alongside Drahmin that Ed Boon pointed out was his least favorite from the era, and internally referred to him as the worst character they'd ever made. With the official word from on high about the team's least favorite character, it was only a matter of time before the fandom would try to get in on the joke, and started hating Hsu Hao as much as the team did. That in turn prompted the team at NetherRealm to return in kind, putting in more and more Hsu Hao hate until he became a lightning rod for it. Many people who never even played the 3D games came in hating Hsu Hao just for his garbage reputation. And I can attest to that. I had never played them, but now Hsu Hao just has this aura about him of, this character sucks and you know it. Now, don't get me wrong. He sucks. He is not a good character. Nobody wants him to come back. But I just think that it's interesting, this cyclical nature that NetherRealm had with its audience, where one side would hate Hsu Hao, so the other side would hate Hsu Hao too. His chances of getting into another game, or even a side project like Cobra and Kira got into Snowblind, are all but a dream. Maybe they'll turn it around and try to do something with him, but someone will have to want to do that for that to happen. Pound for pound, though, the series with the goofiest one-and-dones has to be King of Fighters. Now, KOF is usually pretty good about keeping characters around. Jin has been glued to Athena and Sai at the hip for decades now, and we've only managed to pry him off a few times. From KOF 94 to 98, there's only a single instance of a team getting cut. But this isn't Remy cutting, or even Hsu Hao cutting. It's worse than both of them. Say hello to Brian Battler, Lucky Glober, and Heavy D, Team American Sports. Now, for those who didn't know, King of Fighters was originally envisioned as a way to cross over SNK's two most popular fighting game franchises, Fatal Fury and Art of Fighting. During development, though, they decided to cast an even wider net and pull in more SNK franchises, and the franchises they picked would end up becoming staple teams for the rest of the series. Team Ikari Warriors added the best characters in the series, Ralph One-Man World War Jones and Clark You Will Regret Being Born Steel. Team Psycho Soldiers gave them plenty more work to do as they redesigned Athena every time she showed up. Team Women Fighters and Korean Justice gave them the chance to airdrop in the most popular characters from their fighting games. But it also left the door open for Choi, so it was definitely a mistake. That left Team American Sports to represent SNK's various sport franchises, like Street Hoops and Football Frenzy. The team would make their debut in the first King of Fighters game in 1994, and among the three of them, there was certainly something there. Heavy D was the roster's resident boxer, which let him dash across the screen with big punches and big sweeping uppercuts. Glauber might have the worst projectile in a fighting game ever, but at least he gets a knockoff genocide cutter. And hey, even a bad genocide cutter is still a genocide cutter. And Brian does this. The team as a whole is pretty fun and complement each other really well. Brute force your way in with Brian, pick him apart with D, then sweep him up with Glauber. I even managed to beat Rugal, and besides my desk now assuming it owes me money, it wasn't the worst time ever. They even had a fair bit of personality, which not a lot of other characters in this can claim. Heavy D's the quiet and reserved leader, but lets his back tattoo do the talking for him. Glauber's the cocky and in-your-face type who drops basketballs on your head, and Brian's the type to take a basketball to the head and make a loud bell noise. So they're no Team Japan in terms of all original characters, but they can have a comfy spot on the roster, right? It would make all the sense in the world. KOF 95 is pretty much just a patch to make KOF 94 a playable video game. So just import all the same teams, right? Well, see, KOF 94 is a marvel of cramming 10 pounds of crap into a 5-pound bag. The game was pushing the software hard. So 8 teams and 24 characters was the most it could do in its current state. So if they wanted to include the brand new team, Team Rivals, they would have to cut one team from the game. When you size up who's on which team, the answer to cut Team American Sports was pretty obvious. Oh yeah, and who's the punk on the new team that's so important we had to cut all 3? Now, it's all fine and good to have a dud team on your first outing. You had to make 8 of them. There was no way you were gonna bat 1,000. But SNK has a very interesting way of keeping Team American sports around, and that's to constantly dump on them at every given opportunity. Hsu Hao had it bad. No one's arguing that. But how many characters got into Mortal Kombat at the expense of Hsu Hao? A running joke in the King of Fighters series became that whenever a new team of bad guys needed to be introduced, they'd be introduced by beating up Team American sports, stealing their invites to the tournament, and leaving them in the dust. In KOF 95, Team Rival, made up of Billy Khan, Eiji Kisaragi, and Iori Yagami, would enter the tournament by stealing their invites from Team American Sports. Then in 97, the New Faces team of Yashiro, Remy, and Chris picked theirs up the same way. Now, they would reappear in KOF 98, and in all fairness, their movesets got a huge upgrade, with better inputs, quicker startups and endings, and a whole bunch of new stuff too. But, like I said, dream matches aren't being counted here since literally everybody introduced in the saga would be there by the game's final update. It would be cruel, but
Predictable!
if they were the only ones excluded. Then there's the artwork SNK keeps making referencing Team American Sports, but only as the punching bags for other teams. The most they get is being the focus of Orochi Iori's ending in SVC Chaos, but only as the people he attacks. And as if it couldn't get any worse, in the official King of Fighters card game, the three of them got their very own card. And the artwork? Now, obviously, this is some good-natured ribbing. There isn't some nefarious reason for Team American Sports exclusion. It's just never been a priority at SNK, and when people started noticing they were missing, they decided to have some fun with it. This has prompted a pretty sizable fan movement to get them back into a game. They're not unpopular, and they have some neat moves that would be fun to see expanded upon. Except after years and years of joking at their expense, SNK literally doesn't know if we're being serious or not. In the smartest a game company has ever been, they reached out and asked fans if they're being serious about their inclusion, since to make them DLC could be a gamble, since if it's just for a joke, the DLC would flop and the company would lose money. No company has ever had this much self-awareness to not try and cash in on a joke people aren't being serious about. So right now, their hopes are somewhere between non-existent, since it would kill the joke, and maybe, because if the support gets serious, they might have a chance. But if you want to talk about no chance in hell, you have to look at KOF 14, the rebirth of King of Fighters. The rebirth of King of Fighters. If you can get past how it's ugly as sin, it's actually a really good fighting game, and as the first 3D King of Fighters, the team at SNK wanted to make this game as distinct as possible, and introduce the largest cast of new fighters in the series, for a 58-character roster. Now, the roster had some big hits. Luong, Kukuri, and King of Dinosaurs come to mind. But there were also a bunch of other characters that were fine. Team South America, Sylvie Pala Pala, Alice, they're all good. But if you're making a roster of new characters about the same size as your first ever roster, you're gonna run into a few flops, and these two characters are so bad and so unpopular, I feel confident, despite them being fairly new, that they're never ever coming back. Let's get the boring one out of the way first. So, Kim Cap-Wan is insanely popular. If you're ranking the male characters from across the series in terms of popularity, I'd say Kim is a top 10 choice. He's been around since Fatal Fury 2 and has never dipped in popularity or missed a game. He even made it into King of Fighters 12, which was close to featuring 0 characters. All of this popularity has earned him a healthy supporting cast. There are his 2 students, Chang and the death of all happiness in the world, Choi, his rival, Jun-hun, Mei Li, another student with a Kamen Rider-inspired stance-changing gimmick, his 2 sons eventually grow into a Yang and Yun situation in Gaoro Mark of the Wolves, and even Chai Lim from the Maximum Impact series is another student. His popularity birthed at least 3 more characters into existence and literally birthed 2 of them. So the question naturally came up, well, if Kim's so great, who's the guy that trained him? Well, with Chang and Choi busy, Kim now needed new team members to reform Team Korean Justice, and found them in the form of Luong and his Taekwondo master Gang Il. Now, Kim is defined almost solely by his intense hatred of evil, He detests bad guys and started his Korean justice program to rehabilitate dangerous criminals like Chang and Choi. You would think that this sense of righteousness would come from his master, but no, Gong-il is nothing like that. He's an incredibly laid-back and easygoing guy who finds Kim's devotion to justice. Well, he's happy that his student is a good guy, but thinks he needs to tone it back a bit. Gong-il's problem stems from no real hook to pick him as anything other than a second shot at using Kim if Kim gets knocked out. He shares a lot of moves with his student, except he's actually more limited in some regards than Kim, losing out on the grounded version of some aerial kicks. Now, I do like that in a regard because it shows through gameplay that Kim has thoroughly surpassed his master, but that doesn't make me want to play as Gong-il, that just reminds me how cool Kim is. His supers especially lack a level of flair that leave him feeling super flat. His character is probably the best aspect about him, but again, it's not for his personality or anything he does, it's based purely on how he interacts with Kim. Getting to see the ruthless Taekwondo master who destroys evil without remorse or mercy, now nervous and flustered against his master and his master's flirty girlfriend who butt up against his hard and fast ideas of justice, is fun. Speaking of Luong, she might be the biggest nail in the coffin for Gong-il's chances. See, SNK loves to gauge the popularity of its characters by holding fan polls, asking the fans what they think of certain characters and who they would like to see come back. After they emptied the ballot box from all the Team American sports ballots stuffed inside, Luong came out on top as the most popular newcomer from KOF 14, ranking in the top 20. And Gong-il placed last. Yes, out of all 58 characters, save for the boss of the game, Verse, Gong-il placed dead last as the least popular character, and it's by an order of magnitudes. Terry Bogard won the poll with a staggering 1,287 votes, while Gong-il managed to scrounge up a mere 107. This is not a popular character, and with SNK now aware of that fact thanks to the polls, it's unlikely they'll be itching to bring him back. Even Kim seems to have suffered the effects of Gong-il since he missed out on the base roster of KOF 15, something he had never done before in any game. But what about right above Gong-il? Managing to score only 23 more votes is our second biggest loser, and surprisingly, he's still related to Kim in some way. Remember how I said that Chang and Choi were busy in this game? What I meant was they were in prison. While they were stuck in there, the two found out about the king of the prison, a mysterious man said to have a godly intellect who all the other prisoners worshipped. They found him and asked him for his help to regain their spark for villainy, and he accepted, forming Team Fugitive, with Chang, Choi, and their new leader, Xanadu. Where to start with Xanadu? Well, I guess his design. But what's happening with his design? He has the prison jumpsuit like the others do, but under a big puffy coat with a blue braided goatee that reaches down to his waistline, white face paint, a crown, giant beady eyes, and a lump on top of his head. He is a bizarre design, and fighting game players are usually a little more accepting of weird designs. But there's Necro and Voldo weird, and then there's Xanadu weird. KOF 14 as a whole has a bit of an over-designing problem. Just look at Shune. It rolled up pant leg, headphones, tie. Really brings this together as a formal look. You could wear this to a funeral. But Xanadu is all that visual confusion, and he doesn't even look cool. Then there's his moveset, and boy is he strange. Xanadu's supposed super intellect is more like complete insanity, as he fights by swinging his arms around, throwing tantrums, cradling his opponent, and throwing them like a ball. He certainly has a unique moveset, a weird mix of grappler and rushdown with a lot of moves that hit in strange ways, but I think seeing him in action does more to tell you what you need to know than anything I can say. Did God just try to smite Xanadu and fail? His character as well is Well, they definitely got across the crazy point. You get the sense that this guy's mind has been lost for a while, and I don't know if that's necessarily good. His arcade mode ending with Chang and Choi is him incoherently babbling as he burns the prize money, while Chang and Choi realize they didn't have it that bad with Kim. Ultimately, I think that while he's certainly more memorable than Gong Il, he's just a few steps too far in the wrong direction, and if that poll is anything to go off of, not many people wanted to follow him. Distressingly though, there were at least 100 people willing to follow him, and those are the makings of a cult. But these guys, Xanadu, Hsu Hao, Q, Remy, these are small potatoes. The final character, or rather characters, are the strangest fighting game mystery of all time. A character so confusing, so shrouded in mystery, the very company who made him wasn't allowed to talk about him for years. Those who know King of Fighters already know who it is, but for those that don't, allow me to introduce you to K49. Short for K9999, this is a character introduced at the end of the second story arc of King of Fighters, the Nest Saga. In summary, an evil cartel called Nest wants global domination, and used the captured Kyo Kusanagi to create an army of clones. This resulted in K-Dash, the saga's main character, Chrysalid, the saga's first boss, and Kyo 1 and 2, named after the pencils. After K-Dash turns against Nest, they send Kula Diamond, a girl with ice powers, to try to stop him. After that doesn't work though, the team at Nest decides to go back to the well that had worked so well before, and create one final clone using Kyo's DNA. This would be their 9,999th Kyo clone, ergo the name K49. On top of having the most slappable head in the entire franchise, K49 came armed to the teeth, not just with Kyo's Kusanagi flame, but biomechanical implants into his arm that could let him fire a gun, create barriers, and envelop the screen in light. K49 was truly psychotic, caring for nothing from his superior's commands to his own well-being, as long as it meant that he got to kill his opponent. He held the most hatred for K-Dash, considering him a weakling and beneath him. Alongside Angel, Kula, and Kula's handler Foxy, the team entered the King of Fighters tournament to take out Nest's enemies once and for all. After figuring out his origins as a clone, though, he freaks out, injuring Foxy and leaving Kula to drown in the ocean. Alongside Angel, the only person he considers a friend, he rides off into the sunset as the story finishes up with K-Dash. Now, he does reappear in KOF 2002, but that was another dream match. So why is this character so important? Why is he so controversial, and why would he never appear in another King of Fighters game? Well, I was kinda leaving something out of his move list. Sure, he has the gun and the barrier, but he has one more move too. I've been trying to hold back on the obvious, but K49 is just one great big Akira reference. That isn't that weird on its own, though. Plenty of SNK characters have been references. Some of them have even been distinct. They named the main character of their fighting game Rio, and nobody ever stopped them. But K49 was about a hop, a skip, and a jump over the line. That giant arm of his is just one of many. Every single one of his special move names is a reference to a line from Akira. His voice actor Nozomu Sasaki was also the voice of his inspiration, Tetsuo from Akira. He has special dialogue in KOF 2002 with fellow Kyo clone Kusanagi, who's voiced by Kaneda's voice actor from Akira. And what do they do when they meet? Quote Akira at each other! K49's entire existence is just one big reference to Akira, and not a very subtle one. Following KOF 2002, the game would get a re-release as 2002 Ultimate Match, filling in the gaps and bringing back a lot of fan favorites who missed out on the initial 2002 roster. Strangely though, the only character removed was K49. No other character got this treatment, and it instantly got everybody asking, what was the deal? As if that wasn't weird enough, SNK would later update their website and remove K49's profile. All references to him were scrubbed from their records. In his place was a new character, Nameless. Nameless? was the 9,999th Kyo clone, only this time he was born on Mars and had a special glove made to control his fire powers, and was in love with a girl named Isolde who had ice powers, and she died and is now living inside of his glove. I'm getting flashbacks. And a nosebleed. They managed to roll K49, K-Dash, and Kula's backstory into a single character, and after Ultimate Match, he also never appeared again. K49 was not ignored by the company, they went scorched earth in regards to his whole existence. Developers refused to give comments when asked about K49, and when they would, they were cryptic and vague as to what was going on and why he was removed. For various reasons, K9999 is a scary character to deal with. Of course, he's based on you-know-who, and has, well, similarities that we're happy a certain Katsuhiro Otomo didn't object to. If you count the similarities between you-know-who and the other you-know-who, you'd be counting from now to Saint Swithunde. K9999 boasts a big following of fans in Korea and Japan, but no other character has such obstacles against him appearing in KOF again. Yep, he sure is a hard character to comment on. K49's erasure went even further than just treating him as the blue-haired stepchild. When time came to publish an encyclopedia for all the KOF characters, K49's entry in the book was this. Blacked out, little information given, you'd think the character did something wrong and was persona non grata for the job SNK did covering him up. By the time of KOF 14, Angel had made it back into the game, and both in-game and in the promotional mangas beforehand, K49 wasn't just ignored, the events of KOF 2001 were altered, so now only Angel was present with Kula and Foxy when they defeated Nest. In all the artwork you can unlock in KOF 14, anytime K49 appears, he was edited out, covered up, or otherwise removed, including the official Team Nest's artwork. When people reached out to the KOF All-Stars Twitter account for answers, all they got was, K? I'm afraid I don't know who that is. Please understand. It was treated as an open secret that you weren't allowed to mention K49, but small references to him would still seep in every now and again. In Days of Memories, a King of Fighters dating sim, Angel is presented with a plush toy of K49. The series artist Falcon was making art of all of the KOF characters in order, and when logically it was time for K49's turn, he instead drew a random guy wearing a big green hoodie that obscured whether or not it was really K49. When asked about the character, Falcon himself would make the situation even stranger. When asked online why K49 was removed, Falcon would just tell us it wasn't for the reasons we think, and the reason was very peculiar. The obvious answer that everybody had just assumed was correct was that they had run into trouble with the company that owned Akira, Toho, or the creator of the story, Katsuhiro Otomo. But as the previous quote shows, according to SNK, he didn't have a problem with it. So there was some completely unrelated reason SNK had to shelve a character they admitted had grown a fast fan base, and was even considered the rival to K-Dash in his arc, after Kula ended up being far more reasonable than Iori was to Kyo. It wasn't until years later, 20 years after his final appearance, that suddenly, out of nowhere, a new character appeared. Cronin McDougal, and it took about as long as he's been on screen for people to suss out, wait a minute, that's K49! The stance, the supers, sure his head could absorb slaps a lot better with all that hair, but you can't hide it from me, that's totally him! And when you beat the game with him, Angel, and Kula, Angel confirms it. This is K49, finally out of hiding and ready to make his next move. So then the next obvious question is, what the hell is going on? After Cronin's reveal, SNK went on to confirm that the legal problems everybody had assumed were the reason for K49's removal were false. SNK never received backlash from Toho for the character, and they never once tried to get him removed. They just lied! Like, for no reason. They had nothing to gain. They just wanted to know how good it felt to flick their forked tongues in our ears. So it was fine to use K49 all this time, and they just didn't. But then why shroud the reason for his exclusion in so much mystery? Why scrub him from the face of the planet? Why go through all this trouble when there was no reason to? A popular explanation as to why K49 was scrubbed the way he was because he was a creation of Eolith, the company that purchased King of Fighters after SNK went through one of its dozen bankruptcies. Except that doesn't make that much sense, because none of the other characters introduced in King of Fighters 2001 experienced the same thing. They didn't do that with Mei Li, they didn't do that with Foxy, and they sure as hell did not do that with Angel. On top of that, KOF 2001 and the original version of KOF 2002 are still purchasable on modern consoles, and those are the only games that K49 appeared in. If there was a big legal problem surrounding the character, why would they still be able to sell games with him in them? Then SNK community manager Crispy Kaiser would go on to breathe a sigh of relief as he was able to reveal that he had to keep the lie going for years, and he was finally able to be truthful about K49. But why lie in the first place? The best explanation people can surmise was the whole K49 controversy was a way that SNK was trying to build hype for his eventual return. Like setting him up as this one thing you're not allowed to discuss, like you were breaking the rules for talking about him. That way, whenever they decided to bring him back, the fan base that would sprout up around the mystery would go ballistic to see him back. You know what? Now that we're at the end, I can say it was a clever idea. I don't know if it needed to go on for 20 years, but nobody ever tried something like this before, and to say it worked would be an understatement. Cronin got to enter the game with a lot of hype. He's since become a big fan favorite and managed to get on an EVO winning team. So, as odd as the plan was, it worked better than I think anybody could have anticipated. As for Nameless, I don't really know if there's a need to even bring Nameless back. He was created to replace K49, and now he's been replaced by K49. Cronin adopted a bunch of his moves and aesthetics, so he's even less just K49, but a collection of the entire story of K49 wrapped up in a single character, which, at the end of the day, makes him one of the strangest characters, not just in a fighting game, but any game.